My name is Heather McBain of Fuji Apple Learning, presenting the early days of the U.S. Army. You may know that the United States Army was founded on June 14, 1775, which was just a few weeks over 1 year from when the United States declared its independence from Britain. That means that there was a national army before there was even a country. Of course, back then it went by a different name, the Continental Army. The Continental Army was created by the Continental Congress and was led by George Washington. The purpose of this army was to fight the British Army and try to win our freedom by way of the American Revolutionary War that lasted from 1775 to 1783. Unfortunately for the soldiers of the Continental Army, Congress didn't have any real power just yet. This meant that they couldn't properly pay the soldiers. Although they could coin money, it was all but worthless. It was so bad for the early army that in the winter of 1777, the soldiers were literally starving and freezing to death. George Washington knew that something had to be done, and he repeatedly went to the Congress to ask for help. The country was new, and under the Articles of Confederation as a form of government, which prevented the Congress from having the power to enforce taxes, all the Congress could do was offer worthless money and IOUs. The soldiers began taking the supplies they needed to survive from the farmers and offered them bonds, a form of IOU in return. They were not happy about this, but neither the farmers nor the soldiers had any other choice. The American Revolutionary War ended on September 3, 1783, when the Treaty of Paris was signed by King George and representatives of the United States. The soldiers of the Continental Army still had not been paid, and it was the hope of George Washington that they would be compensated with land ownership. But that wouldn't happen either, as there were still British forts on the land to the west. The soldiers became unhappy, and a conspiracy that would create a civil war was brewing in the army. George Washington received a letter from Alexander Hamilton telling him about the conspiracy and begging him to talk to the soldiers. On March 15, 1783, George Washington met with the soldiers at the Newburgh Address. He had drafted a 9-page speech that sympathized with the soldiers' demands and discussed how their plans to overthrow the government were a betrayal of everything they stood and fought for. The soldiers agreed and stopped their plans. Alexander Hamilton pleaded with Congress and the states to get the soldiers paid, but they still had little power to do so. It was becoming very clear that the Articles of Confederation were not working as a government system, as they could not provide the services that the people needed without being able to raise funds. This led to the creation and adoption of the Constitution and becoming a federal republic in 1787. This was the beginning of the military that the United States has today. On September 17, 1787, the government finally had the power to tax in order to raise money to pay the soldiers, as well as pay for many other services. As a result, the country now has an Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. Thank you for watching the early days of the U.S. Army with Fuji Apple Learning.